Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Frogcast with all things Cambo Combos. We touch on all the important and nuanced topics around this sacred medicine from the Amazon. And today I have a special guest to help have a discussion that's really critical to the evolution and the path forward of Cambo in the global world. So I'm very excited to have Greg Manning here with me. Now, Greg is a ceremonialist, a healer, a teacher, and he's been working with Kambo since 2012. He's trained around 50 practitioners and developed a unique style that incorporates his expertise in the ancient technology of sacred ceremony with an in-depth understanding of energy work and modern therapeutic practice. His work takes him all over the world, visiting tribes to study their shamanic practices so he can share their wisdom in Western terms to those seeking to reignite these lost shamanic technologies in the West. So today, what we're going to touch on is the regulation or unregulation, perhaps, of Cambo in the current global climate, and community accountability in an unregulated space. So let's go ahead and invite Greg on. And thank you so much, Greg, for taking the time to have this really important discussion today.
Pleased to be with you, Caitlin. Thank you for making the time. For
Yes.
this really important subject, I agree with you. It's really important.
Yeah, so let's jump into it. So first and foremost, what is the current climate of Cambo from a regulatory perspective in the world? What's going on right now?
Good question. So, as I understand it, there's three legal categories that something can be, and that is legal, not illegal, or illegal. And so, both illegal and legal means it's written. The word Cambo is involved in some legislation somewhere specifically about this, or something referring to this type of thing. And the not illegal means it's kind of somewhere in the grey area in between. It's not written in anywhere, but it may be something that um, could be questioned, in legal circumstances. There's a duty of care. There's the same thing that we would have with any practice, any therapeutic practice, that we're liable and responsible for our actions when in with an assumed duty of care for anybody that we're working with. So that, I think, is true for almost everywhere in the world, apart from, as I understand it, and you may know more than me, Brazil and Australia. I think in Brazil, you're not allowed to advertise that it does anything. And I think that the practice of Cambo in Brazil is limited to tribes. It's protected as a medicine there. And I think in Australia, because of the death that happened there, that I think that there it is now written into law that it isn't legal to work with, own or practice Cambo over there, facilitate or offer it.
Yeah, that's what I'm understanding as well is that, Brazil has these kind of biopiracy protective laws in place to prevent non-Indigenous people from advertising their services. And
Mm.
then in Australia, yeah, after the death of a practitioner in, I believe, 2019, I think 2021, Australia finally formally rescheduled Cambo, or not rescheduled, just scheduled it because it wasn't scheduled at all. Like you said, it was
Mm.
just off the radar. And
Mm.
now it is the highest tier, I believe, Schedule 10 in Australia, the highest tier of illegal
Mhm.
illegality, um,
Mhm.
kind of equivalent to like a Schedule 1 substance in the United States.
Mm. Which is very sad. It's sad for all the Australians, all of the people who could be benefiting from it. I've heard it said as well, that a painter can do a bad paint job and they don't ban painting, but in this work, sadly, because there's so much fear around the work itself, that it kind of falls into a different category that I can also trying to bring some understanding, putting in myself in the shoes of the legislators, that there's a lots of people who are risk averse. There's a lot of, especially in the States, actually, this culture of making everything a legal battle. And so there is, I can understand it. And ultimately, we have to remember this is that when things fall apart, somebody has to pick up the pieces. We're lucky in the West that we have these structures around us. In the UK, we have the NHS, we have, in terms of medical coverage, we have a socialized system here. So they pick up the pieces. So whatever the government decides, they have to take responsibility for it. And we're kind of protected from that in the UK a little bit. We have less awareness of it. I think less so in the States. I think that people do end up without care when they need it, when it's around and available. So that's what they're thinking.
Yeah, and before we go like too far into the Cambo specifics of this, I want to just kind of touch on the pros and cons of regulation because a lot of these systems are, in theory, designed to protect society, to protect the public. So the reason that, the FDA requires or the USDA requires all of these stringent testings and clinical trials and things like that for medications is because it's supposed to be protecting people from harm of medications that haven't been studied, that haven't been thoroughly investigated, right? And anything, that then has gone through all of those processes can then be categorized as a drug that's either, prescription only, or over the counter, like an aspirin or, things like that. But then you have things like supplements, right? So a lot of like herbal supplements or even vitamin supplements, they are in the unregulated market. And this is where it can also get a bit tricky because it's like there's lots of science and anecdotal evidence of people taking supplements and having benefit and nice medical outcome, right? But because of the way that these regulatory structures are designed, they don't tend to favor compounds or substances that are not uh, susceptible to exclusive patents, right? And so by nature, nobody in their right mind is going to spend billions of dollars to turn turmeric into an FDA approved medicine because they can't hold the exclusive medical rights of that. And so
Mm,
this is kind of what ends up creating this landscape of, FDA or structurally approved regulated substances, and then unregulated substances. And there's all these laws, at least in the US, I'm sure other places in the world too, but
mm,
there's all these laws around what type of language you can use when you're talking about a substance that is unregulated and has not gone through this structure to become approved as a medication or a drug or a food or, whatever it may be. And so you can't make medical claims or else you're technically practicing medicine without a license, right? Um, or creating some sort of like false sense of security that this snake oil is going to heal someone. So all of that is, supposed to be in place to protect people from being manipulated, to protect them from seeking out a treatment that maybe doesn't have any evidence to support its efficacy, and then not seeking out treatments that do have supported, evidence of efficacy. But obviously, it's become very politically infiltrated as well, which further complicates it and has created a lot of mistrust in the people to know if they can really align with what these institutional structures are deeming as safe and unsafe. And
mm,
drugs are a great example of that. And so
mm,
Cambo is in this weird space, right? Because it gets kind of lumped in with all these psychedelic drugs, and other illicit substances, but it's
mm,
still very much on the fringe, right? And it's still very much under the radar of a lot of these governmental agencies that are totally just not even considering it. But as Cambo grows in popularity, that is changing, right? So we're at a very interesting precipice where we're going to witness these governments start to notice that Cambo is around, and some of them are going to want to do something about it from a regulatory perspective.
Mm.
So, I guess one of my questions for you is, do you think that Cambo should be regulated to any extent? Why or why not?
Mm. Great question. What a great topic, and it's not just limited to Cambo for sure. Um, this almost falls under religious use to some extent, and this is a benefit of the American Constitution that there are other medicines that have fallen into this category. And you're totally right to point out that science is reductionist by nature. In order to create proof, you need controls, you need to reduce the variables so you can actually show evidence of safety. And Cambo isn't, and many of these things, they're not simple. There is a collection of bioactive peptides, and some of them work together. One of the particular peptides in Cambo opens up the blood-brain barrier, so another one of the peptides can enter. And so there's this dual relationship that's going on in there, and it's not reductionist in this way. And also, there's a lot around it, which we learn from the tribes about particular ways of doing this, ways of being around it that isn't as simple as this medical model that likes to look at the human body like a machine. You put in X and Y comes out. It's not simplistic like that. Um, so there's lots of issues with this, and I think there's problems on both sides of the unregulated and the regulated, and some crossover with the problems. I think there's something to say about this false sense of security that can come from saying something is safe. And I think that's what's happened in this kind of self-regulation, which is this middle ground, for lack of a better term, is like as we as a Cambo community, as a tribe, take responsibility for all of the aspects and find ways to present that, but actually in the attempts by some groups to create this sense of safety, it's created a false sense of safety. They're a certified practitioner, therefore they're safe. Or the people, the practitioners, that's for the people receiving the Cambo, but also for the practitioners who think, okay, I've got the certificate, I can do what I want now, and it's safe. Or this sense of security and sense of safety is not realistic. And this is the possibility for self-regulation. One of the things that people I've trained have said, where do I get insurance for this? And I've said to them, let go of ever being able to get insurance. It is not something that's ever going to be insured because it's not something they can risk assess. They're going to throw it away to one side. And ultimately, you have to take responsibility for your actions. This is what I try and do when I'm talking to people is I'm not going to take responsibility for their actions as my practitioners. They need to learn how to understand the risks that are going on, to understand Cambo and what's going on out there. But there is a possibility between us, like insurance works in this certain way, that everybody pools their resources. And then when something happens for one person, be that medical or legal or anything else, that we have a group of people who we have a best practice. We can talk about the different ways in which we understand the medicine. We can share information and provide that. And I think this is maybe the way forwards for self-regulation. I prefer it. Regulation is a trap. The downsides of it are that regulatory agencies tend to become more corrupted with time, with vested interests and people getting paid off, and it becomes cronyism. There's a certain amount of scratching each other's backs, excluding people and including people, and it tends to get worse in time. Even if it starts off this way, it gets worse with time. Regulation can be a trap, and also regulation can, when something is legal and people are protected under the law, then it invites commercialism in. And commercialism is maybe a big potential challenge to this. And the idea of big pharma cambo powder, like coming in as a, synthesized or somehow created, for me sits uncomfortably because it potentially threatens the culture and the wisdom of the tribes where this has come from. It potentially threatens or criticizes their way of doing things and their ways of being. And it also potentially invites people into the market who don't have the integrity of care, the duty of care, the real human wanting to care into the industry, which happens. It's another potential major problem.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. What comes to mind is like, okay, these large organizations that are government appointed, they tend to be problematic and politically messy, right? Um, but I do wonder about like these kind of smaller, more self-regulated organizations of these communities. So, for example, in like the Ayurvedic community, massage community, and even yoga community, uh, originally there wasn't, licensure for these things. There wasn't a government recognized license for these modalities until there became these like third party organizations that started to create a set standard for the field or the industry, because they had the experience. They were, masseuse or Ayurvedic practitioners themselves, and they created these sort of like certifications in order to create some sort of accountability and surveillance amongst the community to try to help, orient people towards a set standard of ethics and care. And then
Mm.
later, then the governments came in and said, hey, we're going to acknowledge you as the person or the organization, the governing body that legally licenses people to certify them to be able to be Ayurvedic practitioners or acupuncturists or massage therapists or, yoga teachers of a certain caliber or whatever. And I kind of see that as a potential path forward with Cambo, where it allows the actual combo people to set the parameters of what standards of care are and what ethics of practice should be and should be widely adopted for the sake of safety, reciprocity, trauma-informed care, do no harm, like, all of that stuff. And I'm wondering if that might be, what would actually spare Cambo from becoming just straight, illegal, because it only takes one accident, especially if it's a high profile one or the family's angry or whatever. It only takes one accident for a government to then respond in fear and ignorance and say, this shit sounds crazy and dumb and dangerous. Let's make it illegal. And we all know that making things illegal actually makes it worse, right? Prohibition always increases the rate of crime, the black market. Um, then you have the people that are going to continue to serve medicines once they're illegal. They inherently have a higher risk tolerance than
Mm.
someone who otherwise wouldn't. And they're going to be inherently more risky and less careful and more likely to cut corners around safety because they're already being filtered out by their willingness to engage in an illegal activity where they can go to jail. So the prohibition always drives things underground further, and then people are afraid to go to the hospital when they're having adverse effects or when somebody has been hurt. And then they're more likely to die or have permanent damage.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what is the best path forward in the current state where we clearly need some sort of community leadership to help orient people towards an appropriate way of facilitating and interacting with this substance, but we don't want to just sell out to these large plutocracies that then come in and bastardize everything. So, what do you think might be like a good middle ground?
Yeah, I think setting it up, taking responsibility, getting a group of people, obviously a big part of this, and this is, I know, something that you're actually something in you is intuitively known that we need research. There needs to be some kind of evidence, something we can show for it, and that inherently needs to be collaborative to be able to be that person if they get to the point where they say there's two ways to take this, legal or illegal. And if there is a group that is responsible enough to be able to take that on, maybe it becomes licensed, because license is them taking control, because ultimately, if you have a license, it can be taken away from you. But illegal, that as a backup would be great to be able to set something up in case you ever get to this point, and it can be that they're talking about in government, should we make this illegal? And then there's a group that say, look, we represent a huge amount of people, and this is what went wrong here, and this is why we can prevent that, and we can take care of it. We have the resources amongst us to make sure this can be done responsibly. However, in the meantime, because there can be pros and cons to that, I think one step back from that is ultimately we're never going to be able to stop people who want to buy a Cambo stick and give Cambo to somebody. That's never going to be something that's possible. If you can get drugs into a prison, how are you going to stop Cambo from getting into somebody's hands who wants to give it to somebody else? Where it's not possible, but you can create peer review, you can create trusted brands, and you can create an organization which promotes good practice, that listens, that grows, that's open and humble enough to be able to do this, and that can manage also the people who are members of it. There's a model that I'm playing with, which will probably be absorbed into my practice in the UK, and I've known this with the organizations that already exist that are out there that have tried this, is that people will get the certificate and then they'll do something completely different. They'll mix it somehow and then it changes. So what I want to do, based upon another practice that I have actually in the shadow work community, where you're certified for a certain amount of time, and then you can advertise, your name is on a list, you're on a website, but then in order to be able to stay certified and stay part of the protective bubble, to be able to be insured and everything else on it, that you have to recertify and you have to come back and show how you're doing it and be witnessed. So a mentoring structure. This is something I really think that could be good, because um, what I my judgment on it is that there's something very unique about all of us. And yet there's something very similar about all of us. We're all humans, we're all suffering, we're all fallible, we're all energetically blocked, very relevant to Cambo. Um, and there's many different ways of doing the Cambo out in the tribes. There's many different ways of doing it safely and beautifully. We don't need to romanticize that. There's shortcomings of some of that that happens out there. But in that individuality, we as Westerners are fundamentally energetically different to the tribes. So, actually, our understanding of trauma, our understanding of the complex nature of our society and the pressures on it, the understanding of our complex toxicity, the pharmaceuticals, the pollutants, the agrochemicals, and everything else that comes in, and our different way in which we block energy, that we actually need to have a inspired with utmost reverence and respect for the traditional practices that go back a long way, we need to absorb some of these therapeutic understandings and basic physiological understandings to both of these. So we need Western organizations that have this research, have this understanding, and can hold this and continue to develop it and research it to add safety. It's all about safety. The more safety we can bring.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. For me, I very much like to encourage people to be in their own unique expression of how they carry this medicine because I think that individuality is important as long as they follow the one piece of dogma that I encourage, which is do no harm, right? And the reason regulation exists is because it's supposed to be there to reduce harm. And so when you have something that's unregulated or illegal, harm reduction is the ultimate goal, right? Safety is first. And just like you described, such a great point that you made, that the needs of Western participants that are using combo are different than the indigenous needs. And, we also have a completely different worldview. We have totally different physiology and psychology and
Mm,
microbiomes and genetics and all things like that. And I actually do think that it is appropriate for us to adapt practices based on who we're primarily serving.
mm,
If I'm serving people in the United States, or other, Western cultures, it's going to be different than when I'm serving someone in Peru. I mean,
mm.
just a simple example is like burn technique. Like, man, Peruvians have thick skin and you actually have to burn them differently. And that's just like the surface level of like little difference that you have to, you know, alter in order to approach someone from a completely different environment.
Mm,
But with that is the ultimate evolution of the practice of Kambo. It is being adapted and translated and innovated in order to more appropriately fit the needs of the people that are using it the most at this point. And people can feel however they want about the spread of Kambo, but the truth is it's left the jungle and it's
mm,
happening whether people like it or not. So
mm,
we can either, try to hamper that down, which will surely not work, or
mm,
we can try to steward its momentum in a direction where we can give it some grace and protect it from just going into a destructive direction. Because we've
mm,
seen what happens when people get a hold of these powerful tools, but they don't have the reverence, the training, the
mm,
understanding or embodiment of them. So for me, I think really the key, in harm reduction always is and always will be education and
mm,
teaching people how to not die, and making that information readily available. That's not the same as teaching them how to be good practitioners. That's
mm,
very nuanced. And so for me, like the basics should be available to everyone, and
mm,
every person taking Kambo or serving Kambo should have a very fundamental understanding of, the set ways of how not to kill yourself during Kambo. Um, and then all the other, detailed things about space holding and energetics and technicality, people need to, go through a proper training program. But um, I think that, the best we can do is inspire people to have integrity and to model what integrity looks like, and to also raise a standard by modeling a certain level of education and training to create a bit of a peer pressure, right? Because I've noticed that like when you have more people going through maybe longer training programs, and then you have other people going through a 3-day training program, they definitely notice that their friend who went to the 12-day one
mm,
or 2-week one or whatever knows more. And so
mm,
I think also just like creating these threads of conversation and discussion, because most people don't know what they don't know. And like, bless them, they have great intentions. They want to help people. They're excited about Cambo. They thought 3 days is easy. I can just take the weekend off. I don't have to leave my kids, whatever it may be that holds people back from, doing the full programs. But, um, the more that we can talk to each other without demonizing each other, without judging each other, without being in these tribalistic, exclusive wars with each other, the more we can actually inspire each other and then, raise the standard collectively and realize that we all need to learn more about this medicine.
Hmm. Yes. Agreed, totally, yes. And there's already some commercialization, these 3-day Cambos. But the danger I see in that, and I think in a previous conversation, we talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a scale where experience is along one line and confidence is along the other. And that there's a dangerous patch where people have little experience and their confidence goes really high. And it's a well-known scale, and there's something in that 3-day, and also having somebody in a position of authority saying you are ready, go out and do this when it's so complex. They're so complex. Health is so complex generally, and I think that also, in that confidence, we need to remember that there is no such thing as zero risk. Harm reduction, not harm elimination. We can't do that because, and it's true from any medicine, even some people have problems even drinking water, to take this. And water in too much, as we know from Cambo, can be harmful in itself. You can harm yourself with anything, and who knows whether you can be the best at screening, you can be the best in your ceremony, you can be the best in your bedside manner, and you may not know, and they may not know, that there's a hidden heart condition. And who knows when something's going to go wrong, and ultimately there's no way to insure against this. So this is where the potential problem, it's almost like a case of when it might happen, not if it might happen, because of the increase that we hear about the deaths. Maybe we don't hear about the close calls so much, but
Mhm.
things happen, and we really need to be there for each other. And so all of these things could be provided in a way where people come together with the same motivation, same love for Cambo, watching these apparent miracles because it's a mystery how it's happened, but these incredible stories that come from Cambo, such beautiful stories where people's lives fundamentally change, the quality of their life changes in a fundamental way from this. And it's a mystery why or how, but it's there and it's real. And so many people have this love for it and want to protect it. But I think we can gather our resources as a big group. Like you say, if we come together, we can share information, create little education courses, do things like this podcast. We can create like legal help. We can have medical professionals that are able to expand on things like hyponatremia or other different things. That we can do research, that we can create a study that goes out, and we're collecting data from 1,000 practitioners instead of just the few people that we're doing it. I think we can do all of this, but it needs to be done in a humble way, exactly from where you're coming from. First, do no harm, and coming from that, we have so much to learn, and maybe nobody knows it yet. No Cambo practitioner in the world, nor the tribes know it. Maybe there's something that we can distill by using our resources, collecting them together, and coming together. So I really agree with that, and my heart is here to be part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel that. And I also love this idea that you've kind of presented about, people taking responsibility for engaging in something that does have a risk because everything will always have a risk. I mean, the car ride over to the Cambo ceremony, there's always a risk that you die in an accident on the way. No one's really safe from dying in this world. And I think, one of the big differences we see between interventions that are regulated versus unregulated is, like you said, this false sense of security and safety and trust and idea that, like, oh, this thing won't hurt me, it's approved. And when you have people that are open and brave enough to then do something like an illegal drug or an unregulated substance or try a peptide from the internet or an herb or, whatever, um, there is an inherent like sense of like taking ownership and agency of your decision to engage in something for the sake of healing. And I think that alone can act as a really powerful ritual for people where then they connect to their own power. And I think empowerment is a fundamental piece of healing because a lot of times people become these victims and they have this learned helplessness mindset that keeps them sick and depressed and feeling like they can't get ahead in life. And so doing something like combo or other modalities that are similar, where
Mm,
you have to actually want it enough to say, I'm going to do this unregulated thing that doesn't have a safety net. And
mm,
it might go okay, it might not, but like I'm here to take control of my experience rather than what so many other people do, which is they go to these doctors and they just become these passive participants in their own healing while they get prescribed all these medications that they feel like are just going to do it for them. And things like combo and psychedelics are really unique because they don't just do it for you. And there is that risk because it's unregulated. And so I think that's actually kind of an interesting feature of an unregulated activity is agency. So I kind of like that aspect of
mm.
not having any sort of structure around it yet. You have to take responsibility for your actions.
Absolutely, totally. And I think that's missing. And I can understand how the medical industry has come this way, where people, it's so much easier, people want it done for them. And there's a lot to be said about how that's evolved. There's a broad range of different qualities of physicians, doctors around that. Some of them really do empower and inform and um, however, somehow in this regulation, especially in the medical industry, somehow also in some circumstances, informed choice has gone by the wayside. There's one of the saddest things, like I think you're pointing out, is when people go and the doctor says, or has an attitude of, you won't understand if I explain. You just have to trust me. I'm going to give you this medication. Um, and sometimes when people even were able to understand and make that choice, then that's hidden, somehow obscured from them. So informed choice really comes into this. And tying it back into what we were saying before about risk, if you're part of an organization or going to somebody who has the risk in shadow for themselves, hidden, repressed, denied somehow, if they're over romanticizing the medicine and, this is perfectly safe and it's from the tribe, it's from the jungle, it can't do you any harm, or there are no risks, so I'm going to, then I think that it can't be an informed choice, because how can people, unless people know the risks, how can they make an informed decision whether to take them or not? And so this needs to be a real solid part of any organization. And this is why I feel connected to you in the way that you're coming across it. There's a congruence, there's an authenticity, there's the ability to be able to say, I don't know. And there's the ability to be able to express that in this way. And there's so much that we don't know. And there's an honesty and authenticity that comes with that we would love to know more. And we are trying to know more. But ultimately, life is risky and we're all going to die. And that's tricky for some people.
Yeah, I mean, dogma is dangerous no matter which end of the spectrum you're on, whether that's the, reductionist side of scientific dogma, or the dogma of blatantly trusting anything that comes from the earth or anything that comes from indigenous, um, tradition, because it's more complicated than that. And so I think, having balance and having an integrated understanding with all the perspectives, all the different tools, is the best way that we can hold something that is so sophisticated and complicated and
Mm,
have like proper discernment to move forward with intelligent choices that are also embodied and attuned. And, that's why I think having a scientific literacy and a spiritual connection with a substance is really important for being able to help steward it forward in a way that is balanced because either way, both sides of the coin, the dogma is the unwillingness to incorporate and integrate new emerging information. And
mm,
I think it's actually really beautiful when indigenous communities can interact with the West because we can learn a lot from each other. Like
mm,
there's a lot that we learn from them, but there's also a lot that they learn from us. Like they don't really know about these peptides.
mm, mm,
They don't know about contraindications or hyponatremia or things like that. And also, one medicine man probably serves mostly the same people over and over throughout his life.
mm, mm,
And they're all going to have a similar biotype because they're all going to be, Matses or
mm,
Nogikoi or, whatever their kind of genetic lineage is. And so in some ways, practitioners of the West have a lot more varied experience than someone who lives in the jungle. And so there's things that we learn by working with people with all sorts of different genetic, socioeconomic, cultural backgrounds, health conditions and things that people in the jungle will never encounter. So
mm,
I think it's important, just like you said, to practice humility and be okay with saying, I don't know. I don't know everything. I don't know what's best for this person. I don't know what's best for this person.
mm,
Um, we just do our best to guess, and data is a method of sort of
mm,
measuring how effective certain things are, but it doesn't mean that it's the ultimate truth either. And I think that's where people can get confused around science. Science doesn't actually prove anything. From technically, science can only fail to disprove a hypothesis or disprove a hypothesis, but it never actually proves it. All you can do is continue to collect more and more evidence that
mm,
supports a belief that something is likely true. But the method of science itself, it the point is to question everything that you think may be true and to never stop questioning it. And somewhere along the way, when business has become enmeshed with the scientific method, um, people now think that science is anti-spirituality or
mm,
something. They don't realize that actually in a lot of ways, science is just the study of the mechanisms of
mhm,
God and consciousness. And just because something hasn't been characterized scientifically doesn't mean that it's not true or doesn't exist. It's only one way of looking at the world and measuring it, but sometimes it's limited and we don't yet have the tools to measure phenomena that
mm.
exist.
How interesting that some of the deities of scientism, the Einsteins and the Newtons and uh, Tesla, and if you actually look at their lives, they have had some of the strangest spiritual and religious beliefs out of all of them. And these are the people at the forefront. It's almost like that spirituality is necessary to you, this expansive ability to step over the line into the mystery, to let go of safety and step into it is exactly what's needed to be able to advance. And it's a beautiful way. And I totally concur about science. And I love the fact that you said there's only one. It's only one way. Data is one way of looking at it, and when you begin to go into other realms, there's so many incredible practices still untouched areas by science because they don't know how to measure these things. That is part of the mystery that are incredibly effective. And as part of that, that we have to remember that also within this apparently shamanic technique, although in many of these realms it's not the shaman necessarily who does the Kambo practices. In it's not necessarily shamanic in its way, but there is this connection to the mystery for the people who are the senses are dormant or they're illiterate energetically or with these senses, that the imagination can come in or projection can come in, and that we start to believe something in our heads and we flow with it, and it turns out not to be true. And that's another thing that we have so much to learn from these societies about, understanding other data that can be very real data coming in from other places. And it adds into the danger, where people in this realm just kind of get into their heads into a fantasy world, really. And it becomes dangerous. It's okay until it becomes dangerous. Um,
Yeah, I think that's a great transition to another question that I wanted to ask you, and that is about community accountability. Since we don't have these regulatory rules or structures or licensure in place to vet people that are serving, um, without doubt, I know that you and I and many other people have encountered individuals that we feel are behaving and interacting in dangerous ways with medicines. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on, what is our responsibility and how do we hold people accountable in a way that's actually productive and effective when we see someone in a space engaging in a way that we think is dangerous or harmful.
hmm. Great question. And I've come across this before, and in my work, and many people's there are. I take responsibility for the impact I've had and the experience someone else has had, even if they've misunderstood me. But that hasn't stopped there being complaints about me, and so it's like. This idea of any organization becoming political or naming names. We've managed to get through this whole conversation without naming any organizations or individuals or trying to badmouth other people, because we're all human and we all have made mistakes as part of the learning process. And as we become the elders in this community, because of the vacuum that's left there to be able to do this, then there's going to be the learning curve in this. But I like the model set up by ICEAS, the International Centre for Ethnobotanical Education and Research Service. And they don't have a kind of blacklist or a way of approaching people. It's more magnetic. So they'll create the principles. I think that we are in a society now, thankfully, that we can have peer reviews, that you can have one bad review and 100 good reviews, and people can read them and understanding. I think the peer review system is very good. I think the accreditation system is very good. The same if I want to go to a counsellor, I might look for in the UK BACP, because I know there's a certain level of training that they've had. And as a responsible person, I can go and seek that out. There may be people on the periphery. There's no controlling it. And I don't think there is anything that we can do. And there's a different belief I have about fate and karma and how people attract each other in life. I'm not averse to people choosing difficult experiences for themselves in life as part of their learning process. I don't suffer because other people suffer. I don't see my own pain as a bad thing. I see it as growth and opportunity and all of it on all levels. So I extend that out to the person who is lazy about it and just chooses the first practitioner without checking them out and without really their own things. there's a little karmic bubble there that has its own energy, and I'm okay with that. And I made mistakes, and I grew and I learned, and but to have a space at the center that's magnetic, and it's instead of like trying to spread out and change the world, but just kind of coming in and drawing in, concentrating on the good and the understanding, and surrounding ourselves by people who really understand this work, and creating this structure so that people who really want to do it, but are maybe they do have health complications, or maybe they are just responsible and scared, and they want to be able to come and see that this exists. There's a lot of people who've been doing this for a long time who understand it and have collaborated, and there's safety within that. So that's really how the accountability comes, really through us expressing our not knowing in a way that can be understood and accessed by people who want to know.
Yeah, I completely agree because, sometimes you want to protect people from, the bad apples or whatever. But at the end of the day, all you can do again is educate and provide exposure so that people are empowered with the ability to discern. And when people can't discern, like you said,
Mm.
it's because they, for whatever reason, have found themselves attracted to that individual, and there's something there for them. Because people who are, really kind of in their power and developed don't don't fall into the traps of, these sort of risky, negligent practitioners. It's usually people who are ignorant. And so I think, yeah, the more we can just kind of model, again, modeling is really the best way because then they start to see how certain practitioners may communicate or be able to answer their questions or have protocols in place. And
Mm.
that's going to highlight everything that's maybe missing from another practitioner that isn't properly trained, isn't taking the time to make sure their person feels really safe and heard. And it'll create a stark contrast. And in that way, it's actually the participants that are the community that's driving the success or the demise of certain players in the field. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what you're talking about is like this self-regulation. And so how do we as, elders or
Mm.
people,
Mm.
teachers, people in the field that are experienced, how do we support that? We educate. We
Mm.
educate, we share information, we let people hear what it sounds like when someone who is experienced and grounded talks about this medicine. And it's going to make it way more obvious when they hear someone talk about it in a way that doesn't feel quite right or doesn't resonate with them. Um, and I think that there's so much power for the participants to actually mold and shape the future of Cambo simply by them listening to their intuition and aligning with people that feel like safe and
Mm.
grounded and in integrity individuals.
Mm. I love that. I want to tie it back to something that you said before, which I think is really important, this idea of empowering people and this difference between skills and knowledge. And that it seems like the school system, some in some places, I don't want to generalize, move towards telling people what's right and wrong instead of giving them the skill to be able to discern what's right and wrong, this discernment. And I think that in this process, a different way of doing things, taking responsibility for your health instead of taking pills, why not look at your lifestyle and learn the skills about how to be able to change your habit patterns around your life to be able to take it on board and understand yourself? And so I think this idea of teaching people how to discern is a skill that means that even when we're gone, they're going to be able to use it for all of the new stuff that comes up, all of the skills. As parents doing it for children, you want your instead of having to be around to tell your child what is and isn't safe the whole time, you teach them
Yeah.
the skill of risk assessment, and they're ready to go out, and then they're free and they don't need you. It's such an empowering thing to give this gift of not needing me, although it's kind of, especially as a parent, it's counterintuitive, right? It's like you want this needingness, and I'm the one with the magic powers. You need to you'll never know what's going on with you because I'm the shaman who's speaking to the spirits and knows exactly what's going on in your energy system. So keep coming back to me. Don't think for yourself. But actually, there's something much more grounded about teaching that discernment. That's definitely something that can happen in a good quality community.
Yeah, I think critical thinking is, a very underappreciated and underutilized skill that really
Mm,
every person should be taught, but especially medicine carriers. And this is, where I see a distinction between kind of my ideologies and the ideologies of some other Canva organizations where they do want to maintain control and not be questioned in their authority about contraindications and protocols and things like that. And then, my students come to my training and they're like, do you have a protocol for this disease? And I'm like, no, we don't do protocols. And they, some part of them just really wants to be
mm,
fed the recipe, right? Because it's like, then we don't have to think for ourselves. It's more work to have to
mm,
think. But um, otherwise, we just become like the conventional
mm,
Western medical model where you have this disease, you take this many milligrams of this thing. This is what the phase 3 clinical trials showed. And with Combo, we have an opportunity to be much more flexible and individualistic and nuanced in how we approach each person in
mm,
their uniqueness. And yeah, I can't stand when people don't want to think. And sometimes I get a little bit crass with my students because I'm trying to like really enforce like they ask me a question and I'm like, what do you think the answer is? And I'll challenge them and make them ask themselves the questions that then they arrive at the answers that they wanted rather than me just telling them 3 points on the lower leg or whatever. And so I think
yeah.
it's, I think changing how we think about the way we approach this medicine and even healing in general is also important. Just like, I think we need to take being a combo practitioner more seriously.
Mm,
There are people that are just kind of like, oh, I feel like doing this weekend training. A doctor goes to school for
mm,
4 years for their undergrad and then 4 years of medical school, and then they do like 4 years of residency or whatever. It's a huge commitment. And when people kind of say, oh, I can't take 2 weeks off and do a good training,
mm,
and so they go to these short ones, I'm like,
mm,
people take 8 years of their lives to become a doctor and they get in $300,000 of debt. And you're in some ways acting as a medical practitioner with
mm,
Cambo. So fine, if like, let's take it seriously. Let's not act like this is just a yoga teacher training. Like, this
mm,
is something where we're actually responsible for the health and safety and well-being of a living person. So maybe we should invest and sacrifice a little bit
mm,
more and not want everything just kind of like in our laps so easily.
mm. I think there's something in that as well, that kind of this emergence of Cambo as a thing. I think that things will fall by the wayside, and there is an understanding, and a lot happens within the social scene without us having to do anything. And there's something karmic about that 3 day Cambo course as well. Um, and even the confidence with people that, having done the 3 day Cambo, you give Cambo to someone and something that scares you happens. Um, and that's, and then they come and they go, oh, I should have done the 2 week one, or however long it is. Um, I think that there's some definite responsibility taking that's avoidant in this, wanting to know how to do it. If this, then this. I really love the Chinese model for this. It's very individualistic and they have a totally different language of it. And I see Chinese medicine being brought into Cambo around the place that has an incredible misunderstanding of Chinese medicine, that we take a Western diagnosis, which is a totally different language, is very static, and then we translate it, we add the Chinese medicine, incredibly complex and beautiful understanding of the energetic system, but it's not taking IBS for something as or this irritable bowel syndrome, which in Chinese medicine could have 5 or 6 different patterns that can create this symptom, and that the one of the protocols for it would make a particular pattern worse, and for another source would make it better. And so they really takes into account the individuality of a person and the patterns, taking it as a whole, as a person. It's not simplistic. You can't nail it down to these certain things are true. So the only way to teach that is to give a deeper understanding and of health, and there's no way that can be communicated in 2 weeks anyway, but you can sow the seeds of curiosity. And quite
Hmm.
often, as a Cambo practitioner, I've found that somebody comes to me with something I've never heard of or thought about before. And I find this with people who are more experienced as therapists. They're better at asking questions and they take more time to ask the right questions over time. And the answer is never black or white, it's a shade of grey. And that's what
Mm.
we can help people find. And then it's like, okay, well, what shade of grey am I willing to take responsibility for? Is it, in that field? And how do you really discern that level of greyness in that? And it's impossible, but it's a beautiful path for the right person to be able to really discover so many different fields of understanding, from parasites to mold to pH to toxicity models, to all of the models that come in. There's so many different multifaceted understanding, and still probably so childlike in our complete evolution down the line of how we understand health. And it's a beautiful path for that reason. I really have learned so much. Mm.
Yeah, well, like I said before, you are in certain ways a medical practitioner, whether you're recognized as one legally or not.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does require at least some widespread understanding of human physiology and science,
Mm.
and it's part of why I really am inspired to put a lot of medical science in my curriculum so that I can plant those seeds, like you said, and people
Mm.
can then continue to investigate with the basic understanding of the language around science and
Mm.
physiology.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so as we kind of close up this conversation,
Mm.
um, one thing I want to say just to everyone listening, regarding accountability of like, these players that might be behaving in dangerous ways or serving recklessly. Um, I see a lot of people come at them with aggression, and I can say that almost 100% of the time that doesn't work, because anytime you are aggressive towards someone, they're gonna just contract. All their ego is gonna be, wounded, and they're gonna go into defense. And my sort of prayer and request for when we do have to confront someone and let them know that we don't like how they're behaving and we want them to change their behavior, to do it with kindness, to do it with understanding, and to do it with grace, because I think it's just much more effective at really having that person potentially hear you. And I think a lot of times people don't mean to be reckless or dangerous. I don't think that people want to be. I think they just don't know any better. I think it really primarily is ignorance most of the time. There are some interesting characters that really get off on power dynamics and abuse and strange, they have personality disorders and stuff going on. But for the most part, I think most people want to do well by others, and they might just not have the education or understanding. So when we do encounter people giving advice that we think is dangerous or um, serving in ways that are reckless or, dosing people too high, too fast, not doing test points, not, drinking 5 gallons of water, whatever it may be, I really hope that we can intervene with love and with care and with like a genuine desire to help that person understand and join us, that there isn't this like us and them, that we're all a bunch of Cambo weirdos, right? We're all in this very strange niche together, and we should feel bonded by that, not separated. So the more that we can help each other and have that love and compassion, the more effective I think that will be in actually getting everybody on the same page as far as ethics and safety protocols and integrity.
Mm, beautiful. I concur fully. Keep adding more love. We're all suffering beings, and maybe they're a victim of being given that false sense of security by a 3-day course, and in the Dunning-Kruger, they're just confidence is really high without the experience, and let's do what we can to try and do our little bit to shift things to greater safety everywhere. Keep adding love everywhere in life. It's the rule.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Greg, is there anything else that you want to add around this topic at large or leave people with before we wrap up this conversation?
Mm, it's a difficult line to walk between understanding the immense beauty and mysterious intelligence of this incredible medicine, and to understand also to be able to look at it and understand that nothing is inherently non-risky, and to health is wealth. So take care of yourself, make good decisions, reach out and take your time to understand whoever you go to for Cambo in a good way before you put yourself in their hands.
Sage advice. Thank you. Greg, thank you so much. I really enjoyed having this conversation. I hope the listeners enjoyed it. I know we kind of went off on some interesting tangents, but I do think that they all ultimately are related and come back to the greater purpose of regulation, which is safety and reducing harm. So, hopefully everybody enjoys this conversation and that it evokes some thoughts for you, maybe inspires you, maybe challenges you. And we'd love to hear what your thoughts are about some of these topics that we've touched here in this conversation. And Greg, how can people find you or get in touch with you or learn more about you and your work?
Thank you. Yes, I am Sacred Tree. You can find me sacredtree.co online. I have a presence there. I'm also Sacred Tree on Instagram. Those are the two main places I keep things up to date. Running trainings and Cambo sessions in the UK, mainly in London at the moment, with a few other things that I've got on, but around the south of England. And yes, thank you so much for this. I've really enjoyed it. It's really nice to find kindred spirits with intelligence and grace, and in this Cambo community. So, thank you.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure. So I'll have all that information in the show notes if you want to connect with Greg and see what he's up to. And yeah, thank you so much for listening and hope to catch you on our next episode of Frogcast. Thank you all.